I have a lot of messages that I believe are very important for us in this day and age in terms of living the life that God has called us to live. You know, when I practiced clinically for 25 years, and in the 25 years that I practiced, I had the privilege of working with thousands of students and adults and of people of all ages. My youngest patient was about 2, and my eldest was about 84. So a whole range of people with all kinds of communication issues. But the common underlying thread, if I had to give you, everyone's obviously got their own unique combination of issues, and everyone has issues, all of us included in this room tonight. But one of the underlying issues that really struck me was the fact that honestly, I can say 99.9% of the people that came through my hands and that still reach out to us through TV, media, emails, it's millions now, the underlying thing is identity. And that is actually confirmed from a research standpoint, that the most common underlying problem globally with humanity is one of identity. People don't know who they are. And the evidence is all around us, because all the isms and all the fighting and all the disagreements and all the the way people are not agreeing, and the splits in churches and whatever, what's going on in the world around us is very much based on people not recognizing who they are. Because the research shows that if you know who you are, you won't be jealous or envious or threatened by anyone else. You will actually realize that as you celebrate someone else, instead of being jealous or envious or frightened or threatened by someone else, you actually enhance your own brain health and your own physical health. See, we are designed as human beings to love others, to really recognize the beauty in others, and love means not being judgmental and harsh. It means recognizing the beauty of someone else's identity. But we very often can't do that because we're so stuck in not understanding our own identity. And it's so vitally important that we do recognize what our identity is. And I know you've probably heard a lot of messages in your lifetime about your identity and things like your identity in Christ and all that kind of stuff, which is what I'm talking about. But on purpose, I don't use Christianese. I'm going to talk the language of science. And I promise you will understand most of it, although you will probably have to listen to this a few times, and it is being recorded, and that's why I have books and materials. But I want to honor your intelligence as well when I speak tonight, because not only are you unique in your identity, which we're going to talk about scientifically tonight, but you're also brilliant. You are highly intelligent human beings, made in the image of a highly intelligent God. You're designed to think deeply. You're designed to love. And you are designed to show the world what love looks like. As you identify your identity, you need to start asking yourself the question, what does love look like in your life and in the world around you? And are you reflecting the love of Christ? As the glory of God is supposed to cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. And our sea is made of water. So if waters are covering water, what do we have? Saturation. We are designed to saturate the world with God's love. But it's kind of missing if you look at the world that we live in today. And I get so sad because if I look around at the number of churches in America alone, I mean, we are based mainly in Dallas, Fort Worth, and we live in California as well. And where we live, I think there's about 50 churches in a tiny area. There are so many churches. And if the churches are professing the love of Christ, why are the churches not pouring, filling up all over, people begging to get in, totally stuffed to the edges? Why are people not queuing up at the door? And why is the love of Christ not being shed abroad as the glory covers the sea, or the waters cover and saturate the seas? We are not reflecting God's glory enough. And I'm talking in general terms because obviously there's the individuals that really are reflecting God's glory. But I don't believe the church is reflecting God's glory, because we are designed to reflect God's glory and bring heaven to earth. But you cannot do that unless you know who you are. And that is the problem. the world is threatened by each other. The church is just as bad as the world. Everyone's jealous of everyone else. In the church, we should be reflecting God's glory. We should not be jealous, envious, and wanting what other people have got. And I'm sharing this message with you tonight because I believe it's something that's very relevant for this day and age. We need to start understanding our identity, because identity is tied up in love, and it is the opposite of jealousy, envy, judging, unkindness, and fighting, and all the rest of it. And we are identifying with the love of Christ. Therefore, we should be shedding his love abroad. We should be reflecting his love. We should be bringing heaven to earth. And we do that with every decision that we make. And you are making, as a brilliant, intelligent human being, you are making decisions moment by moment of every single day. And every decision that you make is changing your reality. And because you are in relationship with those people around you and with everyone on this planet, your decisions are affecting everyone else. You're not just you alone. It is you in the world. You are entangled in the world. You are in relationship with each other. In him, we live, move, and have our being. So every thought that you think is not just some random event or some harmless thing. Every thought that you think is coming from the depths of your identity. And maybe that identity is skewed. Maybe it's not operating like it should, but it will produce fruit. And that fruit are the words that you speak and the actions that you perform. And whatever you say and do, is it reflecting what love looks like? Is it a heaven decision or a hell decision? What are you doing with your thoughts? What are you doing with your words? Because if you know your identity, you will reflect that to the world. In Ephesians, the first few chapters, Paul talks about our identity in Christ. What does it mean to have a love nature? What does it mean to have this mind that is making decisions that are in alignment with the nature of the love of God? And then from about chapter 4 onwards, Paul talks about what does this love look like in community. So that your identity is meant to reflect love in your life, and it's also meant to make a difference in community. You are a human living in a world with other humans, and you are entangled, so whatever you are is supposed to be changing your community. So I want you to understand this concept through science, because I know what I've said to you now, you're all saying, yes, I know that. You're not telling me something that's new. I have an identity. I know I mustn't be jealous. I know I mustn't be envious. Maybe you didn't realize that jealousy and envy is going to give you brain damage. Well, now you do. Okay, so every time that you have envy, jealousy, and argue and fight with someone else, you're pretty much giving yourself brain damage. So fortunately, you can change your mind, and you can actually fix that damage with your mind. So the way that you think is going to change how your identity is reflected. So I talk about, this message is called, as you can see on the screen, the perfect you. And we're going to talk about the science of the perfect you. You see, when you were born with a blueprint of this perfect you identity. But it is up to you to grow that blueprint, to grow into that blueprint, to understand who you are and reflect that out to the world. And that's why you'll see the perfect you is a blueprint of your identity. A blueprint is like a plan, as you know. A blueprint is like a glimpse of what it's going to be like. So for the rest of your life, you are going to be developing your identity, either in the perfect you direction, which is on this side of the stage with the green plants, which is the perfect you zone or the love zone. And on this side of the stage where you see the wiry looking tree, that is the imperfect you zone, and that's the toxic zone. That is the fear zone. As the scriptures so clearly say, we do not have a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, power, and soundness. So your default mode is one of love, one of power, and one of soundness. Have you actually thought about that kind of identity? You actually have an identity of love, power, and soundness. So now we look to science and we see, what can science tell us about what does this mean? What does this love, soundness, and power look like? What does it actually mean? These are not just words to be bandied around. The word is alive and living, as you know. It means something. So if you understand your identity in terms of your love, power, and soundness, in terms of perfection being your default mode, and I'm pointing to this side, this is your normal, natural, because you're made in God's image. God is love, therefore your nature is love, your nature is soundness, and your nature is one of a blueprint of perfection. So if that is the default mode, why on earth do we have toxicity in our life? Why do we miss the mark? And why is there the instruction in the word so clearly to bring all thoughts into captivity? All thoughts, not just some, all thoughts into captivity, and also to renew our mind, and all those kinds of scriptures. So there's something going on here. There's something going on about we actually have to do some work to find out what this blueprint of our identity is. What does it mean to operate in love, soundness, and power? What is the responsibility that comes with a love, power, and sound mind, the perfect you nature of man that you're developing? And what does that look like in community, because you're entangled in each other's lives? So I want to read you a little part of a poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Okay, we'll see that coming up on the screen. And it is incredible. It's just a line, and it's incredible. It kind of encapsulates this whole concept. Insist on yourself, never imitate. You see, your identity is so unique that there is something that you can do that no one else can do. And your you-ness, yourself, insisting on being yourself means that you are reflecting the love of Christ into the world, and you are saturating the earth with God's glory. But if you're not being yourself, if you're not in your perfect you, if you are imitating someone else, you're going to lose courage in who you believe you are. You're going to lose insight into who you are. You're going to feel all kinds of feelings that are going to take you away from the love zone and into the fear zone. You're going to step out of the perfect you and into the imperfect you, and it is going to affect your happiness, your peace, the way that you deal with life. And the things like rejoicing despite all those circumstances becomes just a scripture that you read, but not something that's that easy to apply in your life. And that, yes, it is difficult to apply in your life because life happens. But once you know who you are, you start getting a different way of managing situations. And you start doing what I call freaking out in the love zone. Okay, so that's what we have to learn to do. We have to learn to make our bodies and our brains work for us and not against us. So 2 things very quickly. I'm a scientist, as you've heard, so I'm talking about science. Science is not something that's scary. It's not something that is fighting against spirituality. Science and spirituality are very much one thing. There's one author of both. Okay, so spirituality is the story, and science is how does the story work. Okay, so really science is vital in the church. It's vital for us to understand the magnificence of who we are and how we function in community. So we use the tools of science to understand humanity. What has God created? Us and the world we live in. So by honoring science, we are honoring God. Because as Stephen Hawking, who died this week, as you may have heard, an incredible scientist, he said, where there is life, there is hope. And that is so true. Where there is life, there is hope. And as human beings, we are so incredibly complex and beautiful and intelligent and have this phenomenal identity. And your identity is not the same as mine. And there's something you can do that no one else can do. So if you're not functioning in your perfect you, the whole world suffers. How can I say that? Well, Scripture says that in Him we live, move, and have our being, and that we are in relationship, and all the parts of the body, in Ephesians 4:16, has a function, and all those scriptures. Well, science tells us the same thing. Looking at the principles of quantum physics, for example, which is a field that really helps us to understand how we function and our identity, where there's one of the main laws of quantum physics is called entanglement. And entanglement means exactly what it says. Entanglement. It means relationship. It is considered the primary law of quantum physics. Let me tell you how interesting that is. Quantum physics is considered to be the most accurate of all sciences. It is fundamental to everything about humanity. And you'll see as I talk today and tomorrow, and you'll see in my materials, I have this concept simplified really down to a very basic, accessible level. You will see that What quantum physics actually says is that we are in relationship and that we are actually made of love and we live in love and we come from love, and love is an energy force, and there must be some supernatural source that is the source of all love. And 95% of people in studying quantum, or that are involved in quantum physics, dealing with this kind of thing, the talking about energy, etc., believe that we come from some kind of supernatural force. In other words, 95% of the most accurate scientists believe in God. Wow. Okay? They may not call it God, but they're not scared to say the word God. We always think scientists are atheists. Not necessarily. They're not necessarily, they just use a different language. And this is what we've got to stop judging others. We need to start listening, because what we will see from quantum physics is that it is actually saying that if God wasn't looking, nothing would exist. And scientifically, they have actually proven that there is a source of energy that is keeping us alive. And it must be some supernatural beyond what we can actually physically see. So I know this is a lot to take in, but I want to start off right up front showing you that science, God is using science to show us that we need to understand our love nature. We need to understand the power of our nature. We need to understand that we are entangled in each other and that we are in relationship with each other. So quantum physics' primary law is one of relationships, and relationship is that when, for example, two particles, subatomic particles, are in a relationship, when they are separated by many millions of huge distances, if one spins this way, the other one will spin that way, because they are in relationship. You see, what we see from quantum physics is that there is no space-time dimension that keeps things separated. So you may be 10,000 miles away from someone that hurt you and that you haven't forgiven, but though it's as though, because of the laws of quantum physics, which are God's laws, that person, that every time you think a bad thought about that person, you are actually damaging yourself and increasing your connection to that source of pain, because that's, according to the laws of quantum physics, it's beyond space and time, and it's as though they're standing right here next to you. So this is why we need to forgive, because if you don't forgive, you damage your love, power, and sound mind. You damage your perfect you. And when you use your mind incorrectly in that way, you physically damage your brain and your body. Because your brain is not your mind. Your mind and your brain are separate. Your mind works through the substrate of your brain. The brain is physical substance, and it's the place, and it's very complex, and it's very incredibly complicated and incredibly brilliant and wonderful how God has designed the brain. But your mind moves through your brain, and then your brain changes as a result of your thinking. So when I talk about mind, I'm talking about your ability as a human to think and to feel and to choose in your unique way, and in your unique way that no one else can do. You see, you make a lousy someone else, but you make a perfect you. So when you imitate someone else, you lose your identity. And when we start seeing these kind of things about ourselves, you're not going to become proud. You're going to become humbled, because you start seeing what love really means and what love really looks like. Someone who is proud or is fighting someone else, they don't have an idea of their identity. Because you don't need to be jealous or envious or proud when you understand your identity. Are you starting to get this? God is love. Love doesn't need pride. Pride and love can't go together. So when you know who you are, the pride goes. The humility comes. The love, the reaching out for others. The model that Jesus Christ laid out for us when Jesus walked this earth, that model becomes very easy to follow when we operate in our identity. Okay, so we need to start insisting on being ourselves. We need to never imitate again. We need to find out who we are, as it says in the first few chapters of Ephesians, and we need to see what this looks like in community. And that is a lifelong journey, and science helps us along the way, helps us to understand how to apply the words of God, of the Bible, the words of God, the stories of the Bible, the truths that we see in the Word of God into our lives in a very practical way. Okay, so now look at the next slide. This is Erwin Schrödinger, a very famous physicist. And he said, the task is not so much to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. Did you get it? Okay, so your task is not to see what no one has yet, not to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody has yet thought. When I did my neuroplasticity research back in the 1980s, I found that when you teach someone, I researched and proved that when you teach someone to think in a deliberate and intentional way, using their mind, operating in their unique, perfect you identity, they would change their brain in a positive direction. The brain is made for love. It is wired for love. There is no structure, there is no circuit, there is no enzyme, there's no protein, there's no neurotransmitter that is designed for anything in the imperfect you zone. We do not have fear circuits. We do not have jealousy circuits. We do not have irritation, worry, anxiety circuits. Those are things that we learn to do. Those are the result of operating outside of our perfect you nature. So you as a thinking being, as an intelligent thinking being, you are thinking and you are feeling and you are choosing moment by moment of every day, either in your perfect you or in your imperfect you. So when we get instructed to bring all thoughts into captivity, we are very clearly being told by the Spirit of God that you need to be self-regulatory. You need to be very intentional about what you are thinking, because science shows that whenever you think, you are changing the structure of your brain. Right now, as you are listening to me, you are building networks. You are changing the structure of your brain. You are growing little branches called dendrites to hold the words that I am speaking. And you are doing this at speeds faster than 400 billion actions per second. Consciously, you're not aware of this. You have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. But on an unconscious level, 24/7, you are turning the things of your mind into matter in your brain. As you think, you grow. You are making matter out of mind. You are always in a Genesis moment. The question is your Genesis moment looking like love, or is your Genesis moment looking like fear? Are you operating in your perfect you or your imperfect you? You control that reality. You have free will. I lay before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. You and your descendants may live. You're in relationship. You're entangled. What you do affects other people. I just read a piece of research the other day about how when you are in stress or when you are toxic towards someone else, you are changing their genes. You are affecting their DNA. Your loved ones, the people that you are in deep relationship with, you have the power to mess up their brains by your actions. When we pour love on someone, we change brain chemistry. We change our DNA. You see, we as humans create matter out of mind. We are changing our own brain. You are your own neurosurgeon. You are doing stuff in your brain, and it's either going to be good for you or not good for you. And you're not designed to live in this zone. We're designed to learn how to live in that zone. So you have free will. God's given you the ability to choose. How much easier it would have been if God just made us all a bunch of robots, that we automatically operated in love and we automatically worship God and live the way that we should do. But that isn't actually love. Coming with love is the freedom of choice, because as you know, you cannot separate love and free will. You choose to follow and believe in God. You choose to love the people around you. You choose whatever you do, you choosing that. Not someone else. Yes, you're influenced by your circumstances. Yes, you have a story. Every single one of you has a story. And yes, you may have been exposed to the most terrible things in your life, or you may be being exposed, and that's all part of the context of your life. And that is why we need each other, because whoever's going through something is going to need other people to love them, to give them the courage, to then have the courage and the strength to face what they're going through with all the strength that they can muster. You see, we help each other in that way. And as you help someone else, your own healing, according to research coming out of top Ivy League universities, you will increase your own mental and physical healing by a factor of up to 68%. So in the midst of your crisis, as you are receiving love and help and support from others, reach out and help someone and speed up your healing by 68%. That is operating in your perfect you. That is operating in the love zone. That is freaking out in the love zone. You see, in February last year, we've got 4 kids. Our son, we've got 3 girls and a boy, and our son is our 3rd child, and it was his 20th birthday, and he studies at UCLA, and he did a study abroad program in Rome. And the day that he got there, the day that he arrived in Rome, first of all, his suitcase got lost, so he had to go to the airport and find that, and eventually found that. And then they went out for dinner with the professors to give them an orientation. And afterwards, they decided as a group of students just to go and hang out and have some fun their first night in Rome. And they landed up in a really bad area of Rome by mistake. And they got out of the car and the Uber, and as they realized, my son realized, because he'd been to Rome a few times before, so he realized that something was wrong in the area. So he was calling the Uber, like trying to get the Uber back, calling one on his cell phone and calling his friends, but his friends had kind of separated from him because there was a huge crowd. Long story short, my son was noticed by some thugs, and they pulled him into a back alley and beat him up, but so badly that he could have died. He fell on the ground, he was separated, dragged into a back alley. It's a long story, I can tell you now without crying, but I can tell you that I died in this moment that I'm about to share. They dragged him in a back alley, beat him up, kicked him, took his jewelry, took his money, took whatever, and his cell phone had fallen underneath him, and they didn't see it. And so he picked it up, he managed to kind of come around, picked it up, and he phoned me. I was just coming out of preaching, out of a conference, and he phoned me, and all I heard was these tears, Mom, 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 I've just been mugged. And in the sobbing, I don't know where I am, I can't find my friends. In that moment, I died. I just knew the pain. Those of you parents in this room, you've got loved ones. The pain is indescribable when you don't know what's happening to your child, that shock that goes through you. Now, I knew in that moment that I hung onto and clung to the word. Obviously, you pray immediately. You immediately say, Jeffrey, give us your location. You get very practical. Where are you? Location found on your phone. God, the angels are with you. I'm praying, Jeffrey, where are you? You commute. You're doing all those things in that moment. But your heart is like your whole body goes into shock, and you have to make a choice. And I thank God for the knowledge that I have about quantum physics. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing, and why I've written books about this stuff to help you, because quantum physics is God's stuff. Quantum physics has helped me understand the power of prayer. It has helped me understand the power of love. And I, at that moment, realized I had a choice to make. I had to believe that God is who He says He is, that God is beyond space and time, that yes, I might be thousands of miles away from my son, but I am with him because he's mine, we connected. I had to choose to believe that God is there, that I'm speaking that word over, all that stuff. Or I could choose to think, where is he? Is he alive? Has he just been murdered? Because as he was talking to me, the phone was taken away from him. As he was talking to me, all I heard was suddenly pounding feet. I spoke to him for about 30 seconds, and then suddenly all I heard was pounding feet and a deep breath, and I heard this loud noise. I didn't know if my son had just been shot. I didn't know if he had just been trafficked. I didn't know anything for the next 2 hours. I didn't know if he was alive or if he was dead. And I had to make a choice in that moment what I was going to do. I realized with my mind that I was going to activate the love, power, and soundness of Christ that was within me, in my identity, and apply that in this situation and believe all the stuff that we know we're supposed to believe. And I could understand, because of the power of understanding of quantum physics, I knew about being beyond space and time, some of the things that I'm going to teach you tonight and tomorrow and that are in my books. So I believed that the love of God, that He was immersed in that power. And I knew He would, and I believed, I chose. But there was a few moments that I actually really, really panicked. And I could feel my body, honestly, I could feel my body just packing up. Mac stayed strong. One of Mac was actually at home. He had just had a surgery, so he was at home. I was with my eldest daughter. She was in tears. I was in tears. My other 2 kids, we were in Washington. My other 2 kids were in California. We were all on the phone to each other. We had our friends, whatever. You do everything that you do to get the support. The point is that I knew that I had to make a life and death choice. Each of us in our family knew we had to make a life and death choice. And I claimed on the spot, my son will live and not die. But there was a moment where I said, God, is my child alive? Is he alive? And I collapsed. I couldn't function for a moment. I completely went into that zone, and I realized this was doing him no good. It was hard, but I pulled myself up. I freaked out in the love zone. We did what we did, and what had happened was, as Jeffrey was talking to me, the guys from the whole lot of those thugs had run off. Then they turned around. They saw him sit up and pick up the phone. They came back. They beat him up some more. They knocked him out. They took the phone. So I heard them running off, and I'm calling Jeffrey, and it was them running off. And then he got knocked out, and he got woken up about 20 minutes later by some more thugs kicking him and stealing the last of his whatever they could find. I think it was his wallet and his bank card and whatever. And the only thing they didn't take was his student ID. Anyway, he managed to creep into, when he woke up, he managed to drag himself into a little local bakery that was opening up to start baking breads and things. And they put him in a taxi and got him back to the school and got police there. And that's when he phoned us. But for 2 hours, we were in a state of choice, with my mind going all over the place, all of us as a family. And Jeffrey said to me when we were talking, he said, Mom, there was a moment when I felt such intense fear. I didn't know what to do, but then suddenly I felt covered in love. And then 3 months later, he phoned me and he said, Mom, what is that quantum physics thing that you teach called retroactive causation, which is a big fancy word. Now, my kids have grown up with this, so they know these words. He said, explain that. He said, because I am so great. He said to me, I'm so grateful. It's 3 months later. I am so grateful that I'm alive. But the feeling that I'm feeling now of gratitude, I felt then 3 months ago when this happened. So what happens is that, you see, God is not bound by space and time. He's not waiting for your tomorrow. He's not waiting for your 3 months down the line. God is beyond space and time. So God is alwaysness. God is nowness. God is eternal. So when you pray, you are praying, yes, that was 3 months in the future, his gratitude, but I don't know what time in my life my prayers were covering him or my family's prayers were covering Jeffrey. But the point is that retroactive causation is a scientifically proven quantum physics principle that shows that the future, listen to this, can change the past. Because there's alwaysness in existence. But if you don't know your identity, if you don't realize what it means to live in love and to live and operate in this way, and if you just come to church on Sunday and just sing and raise your hands and it's great and you get this high and you get a dopamine rush and you get this rush, and I'm not talking about dope, I'm talking about dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain. And you get a temporary high, but then you go out into the world and you're just operating in fear and in a lack of faith. And that's not living in love. God called us to follow him. Jesus laid down how we should live our lives. And that means that in those terrible situations, in the easier situations, on a scale of from the hard to the difficult to the easy to whatever, you are supposed to be operating in a point where you bring every thought into captivity. I had to capture my thoughts at that moment. I knew that the years of prayer for my son had reached into that moment. The years as he was growing up. I knew that whatever comes in the future was actually already in the past. I know this sounds weird, but God is not waiting for tomorrow. In Hebrews 11:1 is retroactive causation. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Substance means it exists, yet you are hoping for it. The evidence of things not yet seen. So you haven't seen tomorrow. I hadn't seen 3 months down the line when Jeffrey would say that to me. I don't know what's coming up, and nor do you, but the substance and evidence already exists in ingredient form. Because you, as an intelligent human being, in your perfect you, which is how you uniquely think, feel, and choose, will need to take every thought captive and will need to renew your mind to the Word of God, to the way to what love looks like, and operate and freak out in the love zone. So yes, there were tears. Yes, there was anxiety. Yes, we were our heart was pumping, but I knew enough about science to know that in order for me to pray in the correct way, in order for me to make the right decisions, I needed my body to work for me and not against me. So when you freak out in the love zone, the blood vessels around your heart will dilate. And yes, your heart's pumping like crazy. And yes, you can feel your body tensing up. And yes, you can feel the adrenaline pouring through your body. But the difference in this zone is that in this zone, your body is working for you in your perfect you. So as I was accessing the ingredients of, I don't know what was happening, and I don't know what, but I just knew that he was going to live, and I declared that over his life. Whatever that ingredient, I had to still participate. I had to still pray. I had to still make the phone calls. Mac phoned the Italian police. We phoned this. We did all this we had to do stuff. We didn't just sit there. We were in that moment applying, but believing that the evidence and the substance in ingredient form existed of the hope and the evidence that we had not yet seen in that moment. It took 2 hours for him to with the life to manifest, but we knew that it was there. Do you know what I'm saying? When we tap into this alwaysness, this eternal nature, this nowness, this constantness of God, you are operating in a different zone. So you've got to capture those thoughts. I had to capture the negativity, because if I stayed in negativity, instead of the blood vessels around my heart dilating, they would have constricted. I was then setting myself up for a stroke or a cardiovascular event. I was causing a breakdown in my body, and I felt it. So I stepped back. I chose in my tears and my anguish as a mother to step back in the zone so that my blood vessels could dilate, so I could get more oxygen into my brain, so that I could think with clarity, that I could pray what I knew I had to pray, that I could help Mac and my kids through the situation, that we could, do you see what I'm saying? So instead of killing myself one thought at a time, I was giving myself life. And in giving myself life, I spoke life and love along with my family, in agreement with my friends and family, into Jeffrey's life, and he felt it. And he felt it, and he experienced that retroactive causation. You see, when you pray, you are praying, but you're changing the past. You're rewriting your story. And Jesus came to show us how to rewrite our story. And that's what you are able to do. There is nothing in your past that has to be the destiny of your future. There is nothing in your past toxic that has to be your destiny. You can change it. You can bring your thoughts into captivity. You don't have to spiral down into mental ill health where you feel tormented by chaotic thoughts that are consuming you. You don't have to do that. You have a powerful mind. You have a Genesis mind. You can change your reality. And yes, it's terrible. And yes, maybe my son wouldn't have survived. There were 4 kids in a 3-month period, American students that were attacked in that exact same space. They were in that spot. There was a whole plot going on where they were identifying these kids, and there were 3. They would work in groups of 3, and someone would be the spotter, and then the other 2 would beat up the person. 3 kids had been beaten up before Jeffrey. All 3 died, which is horrific. But there's been some good that's come out of it, because obviously we sent security reports through, etc. And now there's the study abroad programs for all universities in the United States have changed their security, thank goodness. But still, what did those parents go through? What pain, but there's still hope. Do you see what I'm trying to tell you? But it's a different mindset. You have to shift your mindset. You can't go day by day thinking, when all these crises happen, that there is the church and there is life. Or there is God and spirituality and there's life. They blend. You have to renew your mind. The only way you're going to rejoice despite the circumstances is to stay in your perfect you zone. When I was practicing, I was trained to do extensive diagnostic testing on my patients. And they would come in with piles of reports and lives that were broken. Identity shot through the roof. No identity. Totally broken. I saw the worst of the worst cases. I decided to run a practice that reached out to that kind of patient. I worked in some of the worst areas in South Africa for 25 years. I worked where they had been raped, beaten, starving, abused. That doesn't make me a hero, it makes me a human. I reached out and I learned so much. I would go into areas that no one came out of alive, and obviously I came out alive. I would work there day after day, and what I saw was once you show someone who they are and you show someone the power of their mind, they will change their lives. I worked in school environments where when I brought these principles in terms of how to control your emotions, how to direct your mind, how to learn, how to build memory, how to grow in who you are, we saw changes. There was evidence. Those schools that were written off by the then apartheid government. Then they would just, it was the pre-apartheid, and I was living in Africa in the apartheid era and the post-apartheid era, where there was separation. I'm sure you all remember the word apartheid, when people were blacks and whites were seen as separate, and it was a terrible, terrible, terrible time in South Africa's history, and it's a global problem, and still is pretty much a problem. But I would go into those areas and work in those schools, and those schools were written, a lot of those schools were written off by our then government, and they would off the radar. And those schools, when I'd go there and teach this message, I would work with hundreds and thousands of and thousands groups, big groups, small groups, and I'd train teachers and with my team, and we would teach them the message of hope, that you have a powerful mind, that you can learn, that you have an identity, that you can think, that you can use your brain to change, you can learn. And that changed those schools that we worked in. And we reached 300,000 people with one of our projects. And all the schools that were involved in that particular project became the top schools, recognized schools in South Africa in that particular year and in the years thereafter. And they weren't even getting students passing. And suddenly they became top schools academically with nothing. They didn't have textbooks. They would share one textbook amongst 100 people. The teachers would write the textbooks on the wall, on newsprint. I mean, I can tell you story after story about one day how a young girl crept into one of the rooms where I was teaching, and she was bleeding, and it wasn't her menstrual cycle. She had just been raped. But they knew me, and she wasn't going to miss the lesson. She wasn't going to miss this message of hope. The hope is that you have an identity. You have a perfect you nature. You have a powerful mind. You have the ability to think and feel and choose and change your world and change the world of those around you. Every time you reach out and love and smile and do what it is that you only know how to do best, you are changing someone else's brain chemistry. You are changing someone else's, stimulating a quantum flow of energy through them, which is the love of God flowing through them, and you are changing how they function. I developed a theory years ago to try and work around how to teach this concept, and this is the theory, and I'm not going to go into detail about it. You'll be happy to know. We'll just look at the colors. I have this image, you'll see this image coming up in all my books. Scientists develop theories that are based on what we think, and this is the science of thought and how we think and how our mind changes our brain and how we have this identity and the power of our mind. So all the stuff I've been saying is encapsulated in a scientific theory, which forms the foundation of all the techniques, etc., that I've developed. So basically, through God's grace that I've developed, you'll see this image in all my books and a simple explanation applied in different contexts. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you this is that one of the things that I wanted to investigate was in the 80s. We were told that your brain couldn't change. I was told by my professors that your brain can't change. Now, I knew that you could bring your thoughts into captivity, and I knew that you could renew your mind, so obviously you could change. Now, your mind is not your brain, and your brain is the physical, and your mind is how you think, feel, and choose. So therefore, if you're thinking and feeling and choosing correctly, you can change your brain. You have the ability to change your brain. So based on that, I started researching what we call currently now, since the mid-90s, called neuroplasticity. And that is the basic ability that we have as humanity, that when we think, we can change the structures of our brain. So we can change our destiny. You can create a bad reality, and you can fix that bad reality. So as you make a wrong choice, it wires into your brain, it becomes something fixed. You've created matter out of mind. You've turned the actuality into a reality. But if you don't like that, and it's manifesting in the wrong way, with your mind breaking down or speaking toxic words and actions in your life, etc., you can change that. And that's what I meant a moment ago when I said that your past is not necessarily your identity. This is not who you are. This is who you have become. So therefore, you can unbecome it. And in the 80s, we were told that couldn't happen. So I set out to prove it, and I did show it. I showed in my research that when you think, you change your brain, which means you'll change your intellect, which means you'll change your emotions, which means you'll change your ability to think, your cognition, which means you'll change your behavior, whether it is academic or whatever, however it's going to manifest in whichever way that you do. Maybe you're in corporate business, maybe you're at school, maybe you're in both of those, whatever. Whatever you're doing with your life, when you change your mind, you change your brain. You create matter out of your mind, which is very powerful. So that's what this theory does. And just there's one graphic I'm going to show you here, just to give you some idea of how powerful your mind is and what it really means to have a love, power and a sound mind. Let me show you the power element. As you are thinking now, I already mentioned that you are literally taking my words, which are electromagnetic. The images you're seeing are electromagnetic energy and quantum energy. What you're hearing is a sound wave, so acoustic energy plus quantum energy. It's going in your brain. It's firing through your brain. Your brain is firing up in response as you're thinking, feeling, and choosing at 400 billion actions per second. Consciously, you're aware of your thinking more or less every 10 seconds. Okay, and that's very significant, every 10 seconds. So you've got all this amazing stuff going on in your brain, and the result is that your DNA responds, your genes start switching on and switching off, and you influence them. So research shows that as your mind signal, your thinking is influencing your DNA. It is the 98% factor influencing how you physically function. You have 75 to 100 trillion cells in your brain and your body. The quality of the health of every cell in your brain and body is dependent on how you think. The latest oncology or cancer research shows that cancer is 98% what we're doing with our thought life. Dementias, these are not normal progression into, as you become old, that you have to get dementia. They've shown it's a thought disorder. So as we don't deal with our toxicity, the unforgiveness, the bitterness, if we've lived a life of anxiety and constantly worrying, we are damaging our brain, because the parts of your brain that build your memories are in your thoughts build your memories. So if you're building bad thoughts, the physical structures of your brain that are holding those thoughts become damaged when it's toxic memories. So just worrying about getting Alzheimer's, and I'm sure some of you here, if you're honest with me, you've worried about getting Alzheimer's because it's all over the news, and every year how many more million people are going to have it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Be honest here, who's had a secret little, oh gosh, I hope I don't get it? Who's had that fear? Okay, so I'm going to say something negative and then followed by something positive, okay? So be calm when I say what I'm about to say. Just the mere fact that you have worried about getting Alzheimer's has increased your chance of getting Alzheimer's by 63%. So I know that only a few hands went up, but I know it was a lot more of you that are worried. But now you're aware, you don't have to worry. You've actually reversed that statistic in an instant. You can reverse that statistic. You have that kind of power. So if you indulge in worry and torment and anxiety and anger and frustration, if you look at the glass always being half empty, if your mindsets are, if you don't have healthy mindsets, if you don't operate in your perfect you zone, you are damaging your brain and making your life more difficult, and you will feel it physically in your body, and it will manifest in anxiety and worry and depression, which are not diseases. They are not genetic diseases. We have been lied to as a public. I've been involved in this research for years, and I can tell you as a scientist that we do not have serotonin imbalances. It's not even science. It's just a way of selling you drugs. Yes, we do have depression and bipolar, but they're not diseases. Those are adjectives. You know what an adjective is? It describes something. The house, the big house. Big is an adjective, okay? Bipolar, schizophrenia, these are big words that describe a bunch of symptoms of people that have mind issues. They're descriptions for people that are in trauma. You have a story. Your story is important. You have a context. You're going through stuff and you've gone through stuff. So obviously it's going to affect you. My son did have post-traumatic stress disorder for a season after that trauma. All of us did. But we weren't diseased. We didn't need medication. We had to bring our thoughts into captivity. You don't want to disable your brain, because whatever you put in your mouth is going to change the structure of your brain. Okay, and psychotropic drugs do it in the wrong direction. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But just for those of you that are not going to be here, I have a lot of information on my website on mental health, and a lot about how these drugs work and how they're wrong, etc. Tons of stuff. My webpage is drleaf.com, and in my books I also have some explanations of that. I mean, that is a whole 8-hour workshop on its own. But let me tell you that God says very clearly, bring all thoughts into captivity to Christ Jesus. Do not drug all thoughts into captivity. Psychotropic medications, which are antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, antipsychotics, and things like Ritalin, which is a stimulant, those do not fix your brain. They damage your brain. And for a season, you may feel better because they tend to numb the emotions. And that's not what we're supposed to be doing. They damage your brain. But the good news is when you get your mind under control, your mind can fix your brain. Your brain can heal. And that's what I would always see, right? I said I told you all of this to tell you that when my patients walked into my practice, they would come with a lot of stories, a lot of sad stories, and a lot of sometimes reports of all the things that they couldn't do. And I was trained to do a whole lot more diagnostic testing to tell them all the things, more things that they couldn't do. Okay? And I didn't do that. In desperation, I did my research. That's why I showed you that theory. And I developed profiles to try and help people to first understand who they were, because I really felt convicted that the first place to start was with identity. If you've had years of people telling you that you can't do this and you're bad at that and failing at school and feeling anxious and people telling you that you're a diseased human being and that you're this and you've got that and live with this and you're schizophrenic, you're gonna feel awful about yourself. Your identity goes. You don't think you have any power. You don't think you have any hope. And where there is life, there is hope, to quote Stephen Hawking again. So I wanted to give my patients hope. And I developed a series of profiles based on my research to show them, first and foremost, the uniqueness of their perfect you. How did they uniquely think and feel and choose? Because as you think, feel, and choose, those three together, you are operating in your mind, your unique mind. And as you think, feel, and choose, the minute you choose, you now switch on the gene and you start building structures into your brain. So the unique way that you think, feel, and choose causes the genes to express in your brain, and you grow little branches to hold your memory. That's what I mean when I say you actually grow physical structures in your brain. So if you think, feeling, and choosing in a very toxic way and you're tormenting yourself with thoughts and you keep staying there, you are building damage into your brain, which will then manifest as neurochemical chaos and quantum chaos in your brain, and you will feel the depression and the anxiety and all those kind of things, and they'll progress unless you catch them. So with my son and with all of us, what we did was we didn't allow ourselves to think. I mean, I had to stop myself. That phone call, still, if I think of it now, I get that reaction. But now it's more controlled. I didn't allow myself to spend time thinking too long about how terrible, what could have gone wrong. I didn't stay in that bad place. But I wanted to, because it was almost felt easier to go down that negative road. But it's actually not easier to go down that negative road. The reason you feel that is because of the burst of emotions. You're a human. You feel pain. You need to feel that pain, but you need to feel that pain in the love zone, because then you're safe. You're safe in the love zone. I'm not telling you to deny things. Don't suppress your emotions. You've got to channel those emotions into the love zone. You've got to speak those through. So we would speak. My son would phone me if it was the middle of the night for 2 hours, whatever. If he was having he would phone me and talk to me. If I felt that I was having a bad moment, I'd wake up Mac and talk to him. Or he would talk to me or my kids. So you open, it's dialogue, talk, listen to that story. I decided to look at my patients as I look at each of you and say, what is your story? Tell me your story. Not what's wrong with you. Let's give you another label. Let's give you another checkbox and another lot of tests and give you. Once you know who you are and you have the story of your life being built and you get into your perfect you, which I did with the profile. And that profile, one of them, I've done a few. One of those profiles is in this book called The Perfect You. Okay, so there's like a huge part of this book that's got that profile. I also have online programs, which are like little courses that you do. And there's another version of the profile, and it's also called The Perfect You. I would do that profile with my patients. And I would spend, even if I spent the first few sessions, first of all, focusing on, let's not look at your problem, let's look at you. Who are you? What's your identity? How do you uniquely think, feel, and choose? That's what the profile would show them. Now, you're brilliant, you're amazing, like I've said a few times. So to even try and explain you with a profile doesn't even work because you're so brilliant, but it gives you a hint at how you function, how it starts training you to understand that, hey, this is who I am, that you learn to distance yourself from that and then to look at your life objectively in order to be able to say, okay, that's something I need to fix. That's something I need to fix. It's over there and I'm here. That's not who I am. In that way, you can keep yourself calm and focused. Your body can work for you. Stress can work for you. Stress is actually very good for you, helps you to have clarity, oxygen flowing. It's really good for your brain in terms of building good memories. But if you stay here and you ignore that and you just focus on all the toxicity, then the stress works against you, as I mentioned earlier on, and then your body's going to start breaking down. You're going to have foggy thoughts, chaotic, go down a black hole, and I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about because we've all experienced that from time to time. So just to prove to you how powerful you are, I've done a lot of research, and one of the graphs that you see up on the screen now, you'll see it says mind changes brain. You'll see that there's bars it's a bar graph, and there's 3 bars, and the one is there's like you can see they're different sizes. Okay, so what happened was that I worked in a group of schools that I did different types of research. This research was I worked in schools with children that had been children and adults that had been identified as having major learning disabilities and various different types of dementia and autism, and it was a whole kind of community, okay? And what I did was I introduced, through the teachers and therapists, a way of understanding how you think through the profile, and then I developed a 5-step technique on how you can actually control your thoughts and detox your brain and build your brain based on how thoughts form. So when I talk about the science of thought, when I talk about you being able to create realities in your brain, when I talk about you creating physical matter in your brain, it's pretty much a 5-step process that you go through. And it's obviously very complex. The 5 steps are simplified version. But I mean, no one's going to listen to me if I give you 5,000 steps. So I simplified it down to 5 basic things that incorporate a whole way of thinking that teaches you how to discipline your thought life. And when I did this in the schools, what I did was, first of all, in this group of schools and in this community, between 1991 and 1992, I looked for a trend. And I wanted to see, is there a natural improvement in people's cognitive and intellectual and emotional functioning in an environment? In other words, does an organization naturally grow in intelligence, the humanity in that organization? And there's a little trend. What happens is that we have across the globe, in organizations, schools, churches, corporations, what you'll have is like a little flow that happens. You'll have ups and downs depending on what happens each year. But it kind of can be leveled off as being almost like a straight line. But when you introduce deliberate and intentional self-regulation and deliberate and intentional thinking through, for example, the 5 steps that I've developed, you actually then change that trend. And you can see, look at the jump in 93. And this is a study I did over 3 years with a huge group of people. So as soon as you start teaching people to become aware of their identity, to become aware of how they're thinking, to bring those thoughts into captivity, you are going to change the way that people function. So that graphic where you see the jump, that shows an improvement in people's academic functioning, cognitive functioning, emotional functioning, and it was a huge improvement. So what my research showed, and many other people's research since then, because this kind of research is now very, there's a lot of it. It's happening all the time. People are showing how the mind can change the brain. But back when I did this in the 80s and early 90s, I was told it's ridiculous. Why are you even bothering to do that? Your brain can't change. And there was honestly a handful of us in the world that were working in this direction. And now it's all over the place, this research, because now we know from brain technology and from changes in behavior, etc., that when you change your mind, your behaviors will change. So I just want to encourage you that there's a science behind what God tells us. When you change, when you renew your mind, that's what you're doing. Look at that graphic. When you're renewing your mind, when you are lining up with your perfect you, when you start understanding your identity, that's why I would start with my patients. First, I would do the profile, get them excited about their identity. Then I'd say, okay, now let's fix what's going wrong in your life, whether it's academic or emotional, cognitive, whatever it was going on in their life, communication-wise, we would then address that, but from here, as opposed to from here. Understand that? So in the Perfect You book, the profile and all this philosophy and quantum physics and a ton of stuff that I'm hoping to get through as much as I can over this weekend, but you'll find it there. Then in this book over here, Switch on Your Brain, you will find, which I spoke about the last time I was here, you'll find the 5-step technique in here. And there's also an online course program thing that will help you with that, okay? So I want to now just kind of summarize what I've been saying and give you a little bit more quantum physics, just to show you how quantum physics lines up so beautifully with the Word of God. And I want you to get excited about the power in your mind. Okay, so if the mind can change the brain in a positive or negative direction, if we know we have power in our minds, if we know the danger of thinking badly, why would we ever step out of the perfect you? I want you to ask yourself that question. Because you kind of all know that we're made in God's image. I mean, you know that. You know we must renew our mind. You know you must bring all thoughts into captivity. You know we must think on these things good, true, wonderful. We read it all the time. But why do we still miss the mark? Why do we still get toxic? Why do we still have depression and worry and anxiety? Okay, number one, you can't control the events, and number one part of the answer, you cannot control the events and circumstances of your life. Because the events and circumstances of your life are actually the result of other people's decisions. Okay? But there is something you can control, and that is your reaction. Okay? Your reaction. And that's why I started with the story of my son. I started reacting wrong. Okay, at first I panicked, then I got better, and I was in this flux until I decided, I know what that is doing to my brain and my body. I'm not going to be any help to my son or my family in that zone, but I'm going to be a lot more help to my family and my son in this zone. So I had to choose which direction I'm going to go in, but I had to be aware of that. I knew my identity was one of power. I know the power that's in my mind because I'm studying it, not just have read it in the Word, but the story of the Word has become alive through the science. So as a scientist, I'm telling you tonight that right now, at this moment, you are creating your next reality. Do you like what you're thinking about? When you go out of here and you talk to your husband or wife or children or friend, are you gossiping? Are you judging? Are you proud? Are you thinking that you're better than that person? Are you operating in love? What does love look like in your life? Because what love looks like in your life is going to change how you function. You are then going to emit energy. Now, before you think this is something weird, where do you think energy comes from? God. Bishop Berkeley, who was a bishop and a scientist 350 years ago, said that God is always looking. And because God is looking, that is why we exist. If God stopped looking, we wouldn't exist anymore. Quantum physics has actually proven that. Now, God doesn't need proving. We do. We need to be told what's the truth of the Word of God. So science helps us understand the power of God, that we don't just think God's a genie, that we don't just use God in a way that we shouldn't be using God. And you might think, I never do. Well, I'm pretty certain that you've done it, because I've done it, where you think, okay, God, you must do this, you must do that. God is not a genie. God is not there at our beck and call. God is God. Huge love. Okay, so now quantum physics shows us that, yes, you may see me standing on the stage and you may see each other in this room here, but we can then break you down, and we can look at your cells and your brain, and we can go down to subatomic particles, and we can go all the way down to what you're made of, and what we'll get to eventually is waves. You are actually a bunch of energy waves waving in gravitational fields. Just a couple of months back, when they had the Nobel Prize winners, 3 Nobel Prize physicists won the Nobel Prize for identifying or how to understand quantum gravity. And quantum gravity is basically you and I, we are waves of energy waving, and hold on to your horses. Okay, I know this sounds crazy, but just hang in there. We are waves of energy waving in energy. And that energy is a gravitational force, and it has a source. Okay, the source is love. So as quantum physicists, now I'm not talking church anymore at the moment. It is church, but it is God stuff. But let's talk science for a moment. These waves, when they look at them, they have the values of love. Scientists have said this. They actually say the values, so what are they made of? The substance of reality is actually this energy force that is good, because we see when we operate in love, when you translate back from the wave back to humans, and I speak love to you, and I'm reaching out in love to you, and I'm listening to your story, and I'm encouraging you and helping you, I am emitting energy of love. The energy of God is moving through me. You know, when you reach out and get in a rhythm, I'm talking about getting in a rhythm with the Spirit. I'm talking the science of getting in a rhythm with the Spirit. When you get in a rhythm with the Spirit, when you listen to the Spirit of God, every 10 10 seconds, which is what we are, according to science, able to do. If you are talking to the Holy Spirit every 10 seconds, which according to science, that's what your brain is designed to do, that means every 10 seconds, which is 6 times a minute, you are bringing the thoughts that you are busy thinking, which are your reactions to the events and circumstances of life, you are bringing them into captivity to Christ Jesus. And you are saying, okay, God, this is the situation. What should I think? What should I do? And in that way, you are communicating with energy. The love of God is pouring through you. You are having a communication with God, and the Spirit of God is basically laying down in your instinct, in your gut feel, in the Spirit spoke to me, whatever language you want to use, but the Spirit of God is speaking to you, and your love nature is in alignment with God. Because what they've also found is that Sir Roger Penrose is an Oxford mathematician. He's a Sir Roger Penrose. He is so brilliant. He's considered one of the top mathematicians of the century. And what he has discovered, and I'm making a very complex thing, that he worked with Stephen Hawking. They worked on black hole theory and all kinds of incredible stuff that I don't really understand. And I listen to his lectures and I understand about 3 words of it, but I've read tons of his stuff, so I know his general theory. And what he says, one of the most powerful things that this guy says, and I'm summarizing it, okay, is that we as humans are made of love, and we are embedded in a universe that has as its the space-time dimension that you've heard of Einstein, you've heard of the space-time dimension, you've heard of relativity. Even if you don't know what it means is that we live in a universe, and this universe has values. And those values, according to Sir Roger Penrose, are love. And there's a mathematical equation, a very, very complex mathematical equation that explains this love. So we have a mathematical way and a quantum way of actually understanding what we are living in. And that is, I'll give you a very practical example of what this very complex thing means. When you've stood next to someone who's negative, you know those people that you go and within 2 seconds they're gossiping, or they are just like, so this is bad and that's bad and this, and you're actually scared to walk away because they might say something about you. You know that kind. But after 10 minutes of being in that conversation, you actually feel like you need a shower because you feel so, and you can feel that that energy hitting you. You feel something's wrong. Do you know what I'm talking about? That is us not operating in the heaven to earth mode. That is us, that is that person, or you maybe have done it yourself to other people. You know, sometimes when I get worked up about something, Mac will, because he knows these terms, so he'll throw them back in my face. I throw them back at him too, and my kids, and we do it to each other. He'll say, I can feel that you've disrupted the love. I can feel it. Like Mac will suddenly, do something and say, we'll get irritated. You use a body movement. And I'll say, I don't want those negative photons. I mean, really, we talk the science language, but what's happening? But you can feel it when someone gets mad at you. It almost feels like you need to move back. That is because you've just disrupted the love zone. Now, according to quantum physics, they can see that. They can prove it. They've done, and I don't have time to elaborate on the experiments. And there's tons and tons of references in my work if you're really interested to read further. The point is, God has given us the science to understand the reality of love. And everything, like you plug in your computer and it gets energy and you've got to charge it, that's what we're doing. We are charging when we plug into God. When we get in a rhythm with the Spirit, we are plugging into that love, and then that love moves through us. Do you know how a radio works? Let me give you a very simple explanation of how a radio works. It's a box with fancy electronics. It takes an electromagnetic, non-physical wave. That moves through those electronics, and out comes a sound wave. A sound wave is considered physical. It moves through the oxygen particles in the air, and it hits your eardrum, and it moves into your brain, and you get quantum energy in your brain, and you start thinking, because you're hearing. As soon as you hear, you're starting to think and feel and choose. So the electromagnetic is considered a non-physical wave. It goes through this physical substrate, and out comes something physical. So in other words, when you plug into the Holy Spirit, you are tuning into the non-physical. You are tuning into the spiritual world. What do the scriptures say about the spiritual and the physical? There's a lot of scriptures that talk about fixture things that are eternal, the non-physical, the spiritual are eternal, and the physical are temporal. You know all those scriptures? Okay, so we see in science, and this is some of the science that I've worked on for years, is that the non-conscious or the non-physical is the spiritual. So when we talk about the non-conscious mind, when we talk about a non-physical wave, we're talking about the spiritual dimension. And what science shows is that spiritual dimension is actually 90 to 99% of who you are and the world that we live in. And this is what Sir Roger Penrose is referring to. This non-physical dimension, the spiritual dimension, has the values of love and ethics and goodness embedded in it. So when we are operating out of our perfect you, out of rhythm with love, out of rhythm with the Spirit, we will then speak that gossip, and we are physically sending out the clanging gong. Remember the scripture? When you speak a word, when you link into the Spirit of God, you're going to speak a word in season. Okay, you getting this? But if you don't tune into the Spirit of God, you're going to sound like a clanging gong. You know that scripture? So in other words, when you don't tune into the love of God, you are going to speak ugliness and toxicity. If you don't bring those thoughts into captivity, you're going to speak the wrong thing. You're going to build, because whatever you speak, whatever you do, you actually first thought about, and you thought about it. Now, this is going to shock you. You thought about it for at least 63 days. And because you cannot say something without having thought about it for at least 63 days. Because it takes 63 days for something that you are thinking about to actually become strong enough, with enough energy to produce words and actions. So whatever you are saying and doing as part of who you are is something that you've spent at least 63 days thinking about. So this is like now, if you go out of church now and you talk about these things that you're hearing now, you might be thinking, but it's not 63 days, it's only a few minutes. But that's your short-term memory. Within 24 to 48 hours, everything I've told you most of it will go, unless you actually do something with what I tell you, which is read the book, study the stuff, get to know. That's why we're supposed to meditate on the word daily. And the word is not just the word of God. The word is also what you do with your life. It is everything that you do. It's the knowledge that God has given you to do whatever it is that you do. It's your identity. So we just think the word is just the Bible, but the Bible is the story of how we're supposed to be carrying out our identity to make a difference in community. So we've got to think more nowness, more eternal, more of a realization. The next time you speak something and you fight with someone, or you say something that kind of shocks you, well, you built it. You spent at least 63 days and maybe longer putting that in your head. So you've been thinking about that. I have a podcast channel and a YouTube channel, so you can subscribe for free, and I recommend you do, because I've talked about all kinds of stuff, all these things, and they're in podcasts, so you can listen to them. And I did one recently in response to the shooters, all the shooters that have all the shootings that have been happening. And I put in there, I spoke about how, because people are always saying it's gun control, which I agree with, and it's we've got to look at psychotropic drugs, which do cause violence. But those aren't the only two things. What we have to look at is a bigger societal problem. We have a situation of people not having a recognition of their identity. If you track the story of these shooters, what they've done is wrong. But why did they do it? Why are we in a community that kids are shooting kids? And in schools, so the very place, and in homes, because the majority of these things are happening in schools and homes. And I mean, this is a big topic on its own, but just to give you an idea of what happens when we operate out of love. When we operate out of love, a child should be safe at home. A child should be safe at school. So where we see these places where a child feels they should be safe, they're not safe. Why? Are they being abused at home? Are they being bullied at school? Everyone has a story. And those stories, if we don't listen to each other's stories, if we don't start operating in love and empathy, we are producing broken people. We are responsible as a community for people being in a broken state. And instead of recognizing and helping, and all of these shooters, if you track their history, they have all let the world know in some way, through social media, through something in their life. Maybe they could be as simple as squashing being very cruel and squashing a beetle when they're young, but showing signs of aggression. A child doesn't have the linguistic skills. So if a child is in a situation that they can't express, but it's abusive or in some way bully or something, and as adults, we don't allow them to express, this can build up. Then all kinds of things, video games like Donald Trump said, President Trump said that it got into a lot of trouble saying it was just video games. Violent video games will contribute, but you're going to have to be in a toxic state, and then be in a toxic state. You're watching videos that are all killing, so it's numbing you to killing. But a lot of people play video games and they don't go out murdering someone else. A lot of people are on psychiatric medications and they don't go murdering, although they do cause a lot of aggression. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a bigger problem. It's the lack of love. It is the lack of love in communities. It's the lack of love in people recognizing that someone needs help. And this is why the church is so foundational. So foundational to changing our communities. We need to be places of love. We need to be in a process within the church of getting into our perfect you, so that we can reach out and tell the world, this is a safe space. You can come here no matter what. We will love you. We will help you. We won't judge you. And we need to tune into each other. We've become so self-obsessed with our selfie society. That was a bunch of S's. It kind of worked there. Our alliterations there. We've become so engrossed in looking at the next feed on our Instagram and Facebook. And I've done a whole lot of stuff in my books about social media. And I've got a new one coming out this year with these principles that I'm talking about. But essentially what we are so busy looking at the external and comparing ourselves, we become obsessed with trying to make ourselves someone else. We're trying to imitate someone else. Remember where I started? When you try and imitate someone else, you're going to become very unhappy, very depressed, and you're going to be looking for things that are not going to give you satisfaction. But social media is not a bad thing. It's a great way of communicating, but it's how we are using it. Are we operating in love? Use your social media, but instead of criticizing someone and gossiping about someone, why don't you write something nice on their page that you mean, not just to look good because everyone else that's fancy and important is commenting, so you better comment along with them, but genuinely mean that. Are you seeing a few kinds of things that you can start doing to change your community? And when we tune into others and not just tune into ourselves, and in the perfect you state, you'll see when I explain in the book The Perfect You, when you're in the perfect you state, you become very, very aware of listening to others. You're not so keen or you're not so desperate for someone to hear you. You actually are able to listen. And in listening, you will be listened to. You start tuning into others. It's very hard to tune into anyone when you're in a toxic state of your imperfect you, with your no identity, getting caught up and tormented by your thoughts and frustrated and angry about, look at my life, it's so bad, and look what's happening to me, and whatever. And yes, bad things happen. You can't control the events and circumstances. You're going to get that phone call at 3 a.m. Your kids are going to do things that you wish they wouldn't do. Your boss is going to do things. It happens. We all know that. But instead of falling apart and becoming tormented and toxic, remember your identity. Remember to freak out in the love zone. Remember to get into this zone to make your brain and your body work for you so that you have clarity of thought. Remember, in this zone, you've plugged into the Spirit of God. You've plugged into the space-time values embedded in the universe. You've plugged into truth. And when you do that, you will then have the Spirit of God filling you, and you will have wisdom in how to manage that situation through your tears, through your freaking out in your love zone. I cannot stress enough how important it is to do this. Okay, I'm going to continue this tomorrow morning because I don't even know what the time is and how much I've gone over. 7:45. I haven't beat Kenneth, Brother Copeland's. He did an 8-hour marathon the one time. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but tomorrow morning, I hope you'll come back, because tomorrow morning I'm going to start talking about, if you look up there, I'm going to start talking about worldviews and choice, the science of worldview and how this influences our identity, and choice. What is choice? How do we choose? What is choice? Is there science behind choice? Is it real? Because we live in a world that for the last 350 years has focused on what we call materialism. It's focused on the physical. It's focused on the 1 to 10%. It's focused on the tip of the iceberg. What do I mean by that? And this is the last thing I'm going to share with you this evening, just in preparation for tomorrow morning. That an iceberg, you can only see the tip. You've all heard this analogy before. But underneath the iceberg, scientists can't tell where an iceberg begins and where it ends because they all blend into each other. And we know from science that 90 to 99% of the iceberg is actually under the water. And it kind of feels, each iceberg blends into other icebergs, so it kind of feels like it's almost eternal in nature. So it's a very good analogy to explain that who you are as a human. Your spiritual nature is eternal. It is this under the iceberg. It's huge, it's massive, it's quantum in nature. It works beyond space and time. It's not bound by your tomorrow. It is massive and fast. Your conscious nature is slower. Your physical, the tip of the iceberg. So what you can see is the tip of the iceberg. But underneath the tip of the iceberg is this huge world, this huge spiritual world that we are supposed to tap into because it is run by God. It is created by God, and it is all about love. And when we operate in that, science shows us this actual experiments, they've done experiments, when people are thinking love thoughts, it changes the nature of how their brain is functioning. They did an experiment, and this really is the last thing, just to prepare you for tomorrow. They put people in a Faraday cage, and a Faraday cage blocks off all electromagnetic signals, all chemical signals. It blocks off a whole lot of signals, so it kind of separates people. So the only signal that can be operating is on a quantum level, because quantum goes through barriers, quantum energy. And what they did first was they put two people that are in relationships sit next to each other, and they were just sitting next to each other, and they were just thinking about how much they loved each other and good thoughts about each other. They were then separated and put each into their own Faraday cage. So there was no physical, they couldn't see each other, so there was none of the five senses being activated. There was no electromagnetic, because when you stand next to someone, you can actually physically generate, you can feel another person's electromagnetic energy. When you look at someone, your brain has got mirror neurons, and that means that you actually can mirror. You're mirroring, like a mirror shows you your reflection. When someone cries, you cry with them. When someone laughs, you laugh with them. When someone yawns, you yawn with them. We have mirror neurons in our brain that help us to empathize. We have another structure in our brain called the insula that helps us to feel empathy for others. So God's designed us with all these sensory abilities to tune into each other. So when you put people in a Faraday cage, you block all of that. You block the electromagnetic connection, and you only have the non-spiritual operating. And what they did with these people that had meditated on how they love for each other was when they're in their separate Faraday cages, they shone a torch in the one person's eyes. And the areas that lit up in their brain, the other person didn't have the torch shone in that, only the one in the one cage. In the other Faraday cage, the same areas lit up in their brain as though the torch was being shone in their eyes as well, because they were connected. Okay, so that has huge significance and huge implications. You are connected, you are entangled. Every thought counts. You need to find your identity, because in finding your identity, you are going to connect with others in the way that God has designed you to connect, and you are going to show love to others in the way that only you can show, because there's something you can do that no one else can do. God bless. Thank you. See you tomorrow.